Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is a screencast-o-matic presentation and recording for the reading for the part of the lesson called What's at Stake. For this part of the lesson, you are to fill in the Google Doc by answering the key concept questions that happen to appear on there. And of course, you can use this reading as a guide to answer those questions. This source will also be uploaded in presentation view on Google Classroom for you if you'd like to follow along there. Let's go ahead and get started with the reading. And remember, you can replay any part of this presentation that you need for clarity later on. What's at stake? November's presidential election will take place in a time of crisis and have huge ramifications for the nation's future. It's a moment without precedent in American history. A deadly virus that has killed more than 150,000 people in the U.S. alone has turned life upside down, thrown millions of Americans out of work, and left the worst economic devastation since the Great Depression. On top of that, a vast outpouring of anger and despair nationwide over the killing of a black man in police custody last spring has led to the most massive social protest movement in at least half a century. This is the environment in which Americans will cast ballots in the November presidential election to decide who will lead the nation during the next 4 years: Republican Donald Trump or Democrat Joe Biden. Every 4 years, we hear people say, quote, "This is the most important election of our lifetime. Normally, it isn't true. This time it is," end quote, says Larry Sabato, director of the Center for Politics at University of Virginia. The stakes are enormous, and the two pathways could not be more different. President Trump came to the Oval Office promising to use his experience as a businessman to disrupt business as usual in Washington and make America great again. In an effort to boost the economy, he's overseen a massive rollback of environmental and other government regulations, and he has cracked down on illegal immigration and reduced the number of immigrants legally entering the country, and he's disrupted relations with America's longtime allies with his America First approach to foreign policy. Biden is offering voters a return to a more traditional presidency. He was a U.S. Senator for 36 years and developed a reputation for compromising with Republicans to pass legislation. In 2009, he became vice president under President Barack Obama, serving in that role for 8 years. He supports immigrant rights, believes climate change is a global emergency, and thinks America's international partnerships are critical. In fact, on every major issue facing the nation, response to COVID-19, pandemic, the economy, racial inequality, immigration, climate change, the Supreme Court, international relations, and many more, Trump's and Biden's positions are miles apart. See the Where They Stand section below. In our lifetimes, I don't think there's ever been a greater contrast between the candidates, says Norman Ornstein, a political expert at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. Best president or dangerous? Trump's presidency has been one of the most controversial in modern memory. He has cast aside many traditions dictating how U.S. presidents act, using Twitter to harshly attack his critics and rouse his supporters. He has publicly feuded with American allies like Canada and Germany, has been friendly toward autocratic adversaries such as Russian President Vladimir Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. He's the first president in American history to be impeached and then seek re-election. Trump's overall approval rating has never cracked 50%, according to Gallup polls, but his supporters remain solidly behind him. And in most polls throughout 2020, around 90% of Republicans have said they think he's doing a good job on such issues as the economy, cutting government regulations, and cracking down on illegal immigration. He's the best president we've ever had, says Ryan Leonard, a 49-year-old real estate broker in Michigan and devoted Trump supporter. To Democrats, however, Trump is the most dangerous president in the nation's history, and the need to win in November is dire. In this moment of crisis, it's more important than ever that the next president restores America's faith in good, effective government, says Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts in her endorsement of Biden. She added, "We can't afford to let Donald Trump continue to endanger the lives and livelihoods of every American." Biden supporters often speak of his kindness and compassion toward those who are suffering, and they say his years of government experience will help him direct federal resources to those in need. Still, some Democratic voters, especially younger ones, have been lukewarm in their support for Biden, who isn't known for inspiring his supporters with stirring speeches or bold visions for the future. If he wins, Biden at 77 would be by far the oldest man ever to become president. That record is now held by Trump, who was 70 when he took office in 2017. An enormous challenge. Whoever is president will face the task of reviving a devastated economy while overseeing a national response to a once-in-a-lifetime or century pandemic. At the same time, he will lead a nation that has been reeling over the killing of George Floyd, a black man, by a white police officer in Minneapolis. Floyd's death outraged millions of Americans of all races, prompting widespread protest against police violence towards black Americans and the broader problem of racial injustice. I lived through the 60s and Vietnam and Watergate and 9/11, and I don't think any of those are as profound as this crisis, says E.J. Dion, a government expert at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. It's not just the issues facing the candidates are different this year, the entire process of campaigning and how election will be conducted are also unprecedented. Widespread stay-at-home orders intended to slow the virus interrupted the day-to-day work on the campaigns over the spring and the summer. So President Trump was forced to suspend many large political rallies, though he remained in the public eye through regular White House briefings. Biden spent months in his Delaware home, largely out of sight. So normally political organizers spend their spring and summer before a presidential election on college campuses, in neighborhoods, and on streets registering people to vote. All that activity has been severely hampered this year because of the social distancing guidelines put in place to stop the spread of COVID-19. Plus, many of the government offices where people can register to vote were closed in many states for long stretches in the past 6 months, creating an additional obstacle to registration. With voters on both sides fired up about President Trump's 2019 impeachment and feeling so strongly about him, either positively or negatively, many experts had been predicting record voter turnout this November. But now with the pandemic, many worry that voters will have a tough time casting their ballots. There's the potential for a huge impact on voter turnout, says Sabato, the political scientist. The defining issue. Historically, sitting presidents have a hard time winning re-election when the economy is in trouble. Before the pandemic shut down the U.S. economy, it had been very strong. But in the past 6 months, the economy has plummeted to lows not seen since the Great Depression. Will voters hold Trump responsible? Elections involving incumbents are often a referendum on the performance of the incumbent, explains Dion. In this case, the public will judge Trump not only on the state of the economy, but also on his leadership during the public health emergency and a nationwide movement for racial justice. This will be an election about who we are as a nation and how we grapple with a deadly legacy of racism, Dion says. More than ever, we will be debating what America is and who we want to be. But the critical issues in this election may also present huge opportunities for whoever the nation chooses in November, says Kathleen Hall Jamieson, director of the Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania. Elections in times of national crisis place challenges in front of whoever is the president, she says. When a president steps up in one of those moments, you get Lincoln in the Civil War, you get Roosevelt in World War II, and this is one of those moments. So as you guys can see, this section down here is going to be copy-pasted on your Google Classroom portals, and you can see the differences within the candidates upon where they stand between Trump and Biden on issues of the economy, on issues pertaining to healthcare, on issues pertaining to race, on issues pertaining to immigration, on issues pertaining to the environment, the U.S. role in the world, and more. So as you can see, once again, this election, although still technically being decided and determined at different levels of government, combines to show us how voter behavior could impact the way that the outcome actually comes, but also over the legacy of what we value as Americans as a voting demographic. Thank you very much for tuning in, and good luck with completing the rest of your lesson.